Hi everybody, my name is Chase, otherwise known as Sulak, and I've been an editor for a few years now, and it's taken me a while to really wrap my head around what it means to have a good conversation. Because there's a lot of statements, I think, that make a good conversation that you could almost apply anywhere at any point in time to any conversation at all, because these are things that are just relative based on what a person thinks. They're generalized statements that really don't mean anything but do actually carry a lot of meaning. So what do I mean by this? The biggest statement to me that feels really weird is people are arguing just to be right, which to me feels like a hollow statement because really everybody is arguing to be right? Nobody wants to be wrong. And if you're in a disagreement of some sort, the other person that you're talking to clearly has a position that they want to hold and they would like you to understand. You could have a discussion and you'll actually find a lot of debaters, what they'll do is they'll hide the debate in the word discussion. But really there shouldn't be any difference between the two, right? There should be, like, discussion itself should be able to raise disagreements and construct ideas that are cohesive, and you can understand. You can walk away from the debate, you can walk away from the conversation and go, you know what, these people made some good points that work, that make sense, and I can construct them into two categories, two ideas, and say, well, if I look at them in this light, this makes sense, and look at this light, it doesn't make sense, or vice versa, or any of that kind of stuff. Now, what does bother me more than anything else is when something is labeled as a debate, or a person has the idea of debate in their mind. And what does that mean even to debate? Traditional media means that two people are fighting and they're never ever going to come to an agreement. There are no debates out there that are actual debates where two people come together and at the end decide, you know what, one person's wrong, one person's right, it just doesn't exist. But I think debate has to get over some hurdles, and I'm not sure whether these hurdles are something that is inherently built into the foundations of discussion. Whether or not we're going to be able to find truth in discussion 1,000 years from now doesn't seem to me super obvious. It doesn't seem to me that conversation is progressing towards something that provides us with more meaning. And as the internet gets larger and larger, and as the amount of people get introduced to conversations get larger and larger, we seem to have a reduction in the quality of conversation. Now, I believe, and I don't really have any metrics for this or any meaning for this or any reason directly to state this, but I think conversation and language has actually reached its limit. I think we assume that the English language will continue to scale to millions, hundreds of millions, billions of people. But I'm really suspicious, the more that I dig into different spaces of people and different ideas, the more I start to realize that language itself seems to encapsulate a whole bunch of ideas, and if those ideas don't overlap between the two conversations, then no conversation is happening at all. You can use the same words, you can use the same concepts and ideas, but if the foundations of those ideas are built in different societies, then you're not speaking the same language. You are speaking English, you are speaking whatever language you're talking about, but the words themselves are not sourced from the same place. When I think about an apple, all of the primary features of an apple come to mind. The fact that it's red, the flavor, the crunch, the stem, even the apple tree gets applied to the idea when I say apple. And really, when you hear apple, you should be able to think about an apple. You should be able to think that the apple is red and crunchy and all that kind of, all those ideas. But when our societies are developed so far apart that some societies have the idea of a small green apple that's sour, and other societies have an idea of a large red apple that's sweet, we start to create an environment where the debate about what an apple is or whether or not an apple is good becomes something that is foundationally impossible. We cannot talk about things like morality. We cannot talk about things like evolution or abortion or war or these words, they don't seem to mean anything between the two societies that are defining them. Now, it feels like in the past, this separation was very clear in terms of language, in terms of the way people speak individual types of languages, the way language splits off and says it's spoken one way in one place. Like it's very clear that Scottish people and Irish people have a very different style of English than British English people do. And it's very clear that when you jump from Europe to North America, the types of English that are spoken in between the two vary quite a bit, even though there's a whole bunch of overlap, even though there's a whole bunch of cultural overlap. So I find it really hard and really difficult to talk about ideas because the dictionary definition that we have of those ideas across millions and millions and hundreds of millions, if not billions of people, starts to dilute into something that we can no longer reference as one specific idea that we can talk about, we can discuss, we can break down. I can't say that abortion is murder because in some places, and I know obviously we have structures to deal with this, we have systemic structures, but even those structures are being tested at the moment. The idea of abortion and the idea of murder are so different when it comes to different people and societies. I don't know if we can have this conversation anymore. Like, I don't know if it's possible for the West Coast and the East Coast United States to have a conversation that makes sense when the separation between these types of words that they're using might as well be a completely different language. I don't know how to deal with a society where the language that I speak in my section of my town is different than the language that someone else speaks in the same town, because what we're doing is absorbing language from cultures that are not local. There's no local consensus anymore about what these ideas mean or how to break them down, and academia, this is a real frustrating one. Academia does have a real solution to these things. There are traditional ways that two societies can come together, discuss an idea, and find some kind of coherence. But the problem is those academic structures have incentives that are not applied to the rest of the world. These incentives of constructing an idea from the ground up, walking through every single individual concept within that idea, figuring out where the foundations are, and then also too refining the language in such a way that it restricts both users or both speakers so that they must engage in a very small window for the conversation to happen. All of those incentives are gone. The YouTuber, the TikToker, the X.com professional has no incentive at all to put their ideas within that window, within that constraint, and speak to that specific idea. What they're incentivized to do is to create a cohesive vocabulary. They create this coherent idea about the way that the world works, and then what they're incentivized to do is to isolate their viewers and isolate the people that are the people that are relying on them for information, so that when they go and they speak with other people, the window that they're talking through cannot be spoken back to in any other framing but that specific window. When I'm part of my little society and I hear apples, in my head I think green, sour apples that I don't like, that are bad. And if everybody eats green, sour apples, they will be unhappy. And then when I hear somebody else come, like I'm incentivized so that, or the people that I'm watching or these creators are incentivized so that when someone comes along and says, hey, no, apples can be good, apples can taste good, they can have a positive impact on your life, they can make you happy, the framing at which somebody has defined the green apple is so strong that the person that you're talking to cannot possibly imagine a different type of apple or a different type of frame. And they're right. They're actually right. Because the vocabulary that they put together is consistent. It's like really, really consistent. Whenever you hear the word abortion, the consistency at which abortion is applied in both sides of the fight they do make sense. It does make sense that if something is life, then something is murder. But we can never move away from that frame. I do think there are people out there that are very good at getting past this frame, the small, narrow frame of society. But I've had a hard time with it, honestly. As just a regular working average dude, and I talk to very intellectually driven people who are educated, a lot of the times the solutions that they say or the answers that they say are inherently obvious to them because of the circle of definitions that they've built in their life. These things aren't inherently obvious to me. And when I ask why, often, they have just as much of a dogmatic stance towards their definition as the opposing side does. And I just don't know how to deal with this. Now, it seems to me the life solution to this, the comforting solution, is what many very successful people have done, is to create an environment around them that agrees with all of these definitions. They agree with all of these ideas. And it works. It really works. Not everybody can do it. Only a very small minority of people can do it. And what it does, unfortunately, it creates this this agreement, this mutual agreement, which I disagree with fundamentally, between the people who have managed to isolate themselves. The arguments that they are putting together are something other than personal preference. Because at the end of the day, most of these choices, most of these ideas, come down to personal preference. A good test of this, actually, is Agrippa's trilemma. It's the three horns of Agrippa's trilemma. It's either dogmatism, infinite regression, or, oh geez, what's the third one? I'm brain farting right now. Circular reasoning, that's it. And so there's no way, you can't have such a mass amount of certainty in many of these spaces that people do without just accepting that the people just want the world in a very specific way. Now, something that people are forgetting, and this is coming back to this, is the solution that many of the very successful, wealthy people have. And the solution is a difficult one, but it's power, right? The Trump administration is a good example of this, where they were arguing for so long about things that were not necessarily true, and their solution was power. Their solution was, I'm not going to have this conversation anymore. They decided, MAGA decided, that they didn't want to have a conversation where the people that they were talking to were speaking a different language. And what I'm scared of is the people who uphold the highest levels of conversation, that do adhere, especially in academia, to this solid truth-finding method, lose sight of the fact that it is power initially that gave them this space to have the conversation in the first place. Power does threaten conversation. There's this inclination that I think most of the intellectual and intelligentsia world has, where conversation itself is something that then enables power and creates an environment that allows us to have good conversation, which is actually completely wrong, at least in my view from what I've seen so far. It seems like power has to be something that is unfairly, and I will say literally unfairly, captured. It has to be something that is intellectually incoherent for someone to say that I would like the space over there to have a good conversation. It's very inconsistent, because you do have to tip the balance of the scale towards the culture that enables the good conversation And the only way to do that is to tip away from good conversation, it's terrifying. So where we go with this, I don't really know. I just know that it should be good conversation out there. And I question whether or not conversation itself is good conversation. Like whether or not there's a different language that we can speak that is much more refined and can create good conversation. Or whether the act of talking and the act of shaking the air and vibrating it and vibrating your ears is something that is like actually effectively communicative towards multiple people. Or whether or not you need a society that has a small subset of people with high levels of control that adhere to this need for quality conversation. Because as soon as we slip away from a society that no longer has these, I'll say gatekeepers of conversation at the peak, power itself starts to slowly but surely inject its way into ideas. And that's wrong. That's bad. I don't know how to get away from it. Anyways, thanks for listening.